They found her running barefoot down the empty country road, her pink dress caked with mud and her voice breaking through the quiet forest like a cracked bell. Her tiny hands shook violently as she chased the roaring motorcycles, her breath shredding against her ribs. The words she screamed were enough to freeze the blood of even the hardest men riding that day. "They hung my mom on a tree, save her." If you're watching this right now, take a second, hit like, comment, share, and subscribe if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of stepping up when a life depends on it. And tell us where you're watching from. Now, let's begin. The man riding at the front of the long line of roaring Harley-Davidsons was called Colt Henderson, a broad-shouldered, silver-bearded leader of the Iron Heaven Riders, a group of tough but deeply loyal bikers who had seen enough hurt in the world to know when pain was real. When the little girl stumbled toward his bike, he braked so hard the tires cried against the road. Behind him, nearly 100 riders slowed in a wave, like thunder rolling to a stop. The little girl, later known to him as Harlow Grace, could barely breathe. Her face was streaked with tears and dirt, her legs wobbling like they were about to give up entirely. Colt could tell immediately that she had been running for a long time. He noticed the red marks around her wrists, the tremors in her voice, and the way her eyes darted around as if expecting something horrible to leap from the trees. This wasn't a child throwing a tantrum, this was a child who had seen something no child ever should. Harlow pointed with a shaking hand toward the thick forest beside the road. Colt glanced over his shoulder at his men, and without hesitation, he revved his engine and veered toward the trees, the rest of the riders following behind him like a storm made of steel and thunder. Harlow stumbled after them as fast as she could, but Colt lifted her gently into his arms and placed her in front of him on the bike. She clung to his leather vest like it was the only solid thing left in her world. The trail she guided them to was narrow, hidden beneath overgrown branches and thick ferns, as though the forest itself wanted to swallow whatever truth lay inside. The bikers moved carefully, their boots crunching leaves and broken twigs. Colt felt Harlow's tiny heartbeat slamming against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that echoed her terror. Every step deeper into the woods made the air feel heavier. Then they saw it. A clearing opened like a wound in the forest. And there, beneath a massive oak tree, swaying ever so slightly in the breeze, hung a woman, Harlow's mother, Aubrey Grace. Her feet were barely touching the ground. Her hands were bound. Her head hung forward, her body motionless. It was a sight that silenced even the wildest soul among the riders. Colt surged forward, his voice thick with urgency as he rushed to lift the woman's weight while another biker cut the rope. Aubrey collapsed into Colt's arms like a wilted flower. He laid her gently on the forest floor. Her breathing was shallow but still present, a flicker of life refusing to give in. Her lips were bruised, her skin scratched, and her pulse so faint it almost disappeared under Colt's fingertips. Harlow dropped beside her mother, gripping her hand, sobbing so hard she couldn't form words. Colt felt something inside him shift painfully, a familiar ache he thought he had buried long ago, the memory of losing his own daughter years earlier. He vowed then and there that this child would not suffer the same fate. With quick coordination, the bikers formed a protective circle around Aubrey and Harlow. One man rushed back to the road to grab a medical kit. Another kept watch, scanning the shadows. Colt covered Aubrey with his vest to keep her warm. As her breathing steadied slightly, he finally asked what had happened, not through spoken words, but through a calm presence that encouraged Harlow to speak softly, haltingly. Between sniffles, she explained how dangerous men had come the night before. How they broke into their small home in the woods, accusing her mother of knowing too much about something she never even understood. How they tied Harlow and left her inside, and how she managed to escape through a loose board in the wall. She ran until her legs burned, screaming for help until her throat felt raw. She had been running for hours until she saw the long line of motorcycles approaching like hope on wheels. For Colt, that was enough. He didn't need the details. He didn't care who those men were or what they wanted. What mattered was that Aubrey and Harlow were alive, barely, and the people who hurt them were still out there. He made a silent promise, they would not come back. The bikers carried Aubrey carefully through the woods, taking turns supporting her weight. Colt held Harlow close the entire time, the little girl trembling but slowly finding comfort in his steady heartbeat. When they reached the road, the group formed an escort around Colt's bike and sped toward the nearby town, creating a protective shield of chrome and fury around the injured mother and her daughter. At the small town clinic, doctors worked urgently on Aubrey. Harlow waited in Colt's lap, unable to stop crying, her body shaking uncontrollably. Colt wrapped his arms around her like a fortress. He had comforted brothers dying on battlefields, held the hands of friends in their final moments, but nothing tore at him quite like this trembling child trying to be brave while the world fell apart around her. Hours passed. The sun dipped low. And finally, the doctor stepped out with exhaustion in his eyes but relief as well. Aubrey was alive. Weak. Hurt. But alive. The news made Harlow burst into tears again, but this time with hope, not fear. Colt felt his own eyes burn with emotion. He wasn't a man given to crying, but life had a way of breaking open even the toughest armor. The bikers didn't leave. Not that night. Not the next. They took shifts guarding the clinic, engines rumbling outside like loyal wolves standing watch. Colt made sure Harlow had food, a warm blanket, and a place to sleep. When she refused to sleep alone, he sat beside her bed until she drifted off. Over the next week, the writers helped repair the damaged home in the woods. They replaced windows, fixed walls, and filled the kitchen with groceries. They even placed motion sensor lights around the property. Colt made sure a camera system was installed, and 2 bikers volunteered to patrol the area for the next month. Harlow slowly began to smile again, small at first, then brighter as days passed. She would run to Colt whenever he visited, her arms wrapping around his rough, tattooed forearm with absolute trust. Colt, who thought his heart had no room left for fatherly love, found himself waiting for those little arms each day. Aubrey, recovering but still fragile, often watched from the porch with tears glimmering in her eyes. She knew that without these strangers, these rough, leather-clad men society often judged unfairly, she and her daughter would never have survived. Weeks later, when Colt prepared to leave, Harlow cried and begged him not to go. It was a plea that carved straight through him. He knelt, resting his big hand on her small shoulder, promising he would always return. And he kept that promise, visiting so often that the neighbors eventually joked that Harlow had adopted a biker as a dad. The writers didn't just save Harlow and Aubrey, they became part of their lives, their protectors, their family. The forest no longer felt threatening. The house no longer felt empty. And Colt no longer felt the hollow loneliness of a man who had lost everything. In saving them, he too had been saved. If this story touched your heart even a little, please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Stories like this help remind the world that kindness still exists, even in places you'd never expect. Before we end, comment below, what would you have done if you were the one riding that bike that day? And remember, sometimes the family we find is the one destiny sends running toward us, crying for help, when we least expect it.